The radio cut out at the exact moment the lead Humvee hit the first body, and the body got up. I felt it through the floor of the truck before I understood it, that soft, heavy thump you never forget once you've felt it. The kind of contact that has weight and give to it. Nothing at all like a curb or a pothole or a strip of blown tire. There's a wrongness to it that goes straight past your ears and into your gut. Then came the wet drag of something caught and rolling under the tires. A sound that turned my stomach, because I knew it for what it was, the way you know your own name. I was riding in the second vehicle, right behind Sergeant Dunn's lead Humvee, watching the stadium lights of Arrowhead rise over the highway like something out of another world entirely. And for half a second, I let myself believe it was a deer. A deer had wandered onto the interstate, that was all. The way they do at night when the world goes quiet and they forget to be afraid of us. Big and dumb and unlucky. I held on to that little lie for exactly as long as it took me to glance up at the side mirror. It was a man in a delivery uniform. Brown shirt, brown pants, the kind of outfit you see 100 times a week and never once actually look at. Half his shoulder was simply gone. The fabric dark and slick and clinging around the edge of the wound. And his arm was bent the wrong way at the elbow, the joint folded backward on itself, like a marionette with one cut string. And he was crawling up off the asphalt with that ruined arm, dragging the dead weight of himself toward our taillights. His face tipped up into the red glow of our brake lights. And his mouth was working, opening and closing, like he wanted nothing in this world so much as to climb up into the truck with us. There was no fear in him, no pain. That was the part that reached into my chest and closed a cold fist around something in there. A man with that kind of damage should have been screaming himself hoarse or lying unconscious in shock, and instead he was reaching for us with a patient, mindless, bottomless hunger, like a machine that had been handed one single instruction and would carry it out until its body fell apart underneath it. My name is Ray Holloway. I'm 46 years old, and 22 of those years I gave to the National Guard as a combat medic. 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a summer, and then the long, ugly stretches when it was more than that. The rest of my years I've spent driving a tow truck out of a yard in Independence, Missouri, pulling people out of ditches and off icy shoulders, and out of the worst nights of their lives, learning to read a wreck before I ever opened a door. I'd been pulled back into the uniform 6 days before all of this, when the call-up notices went out across the whole metro at once, a folded sheet of paper taped to my front door, and a phone tree that lit up my cell at 2 a.m. with a recorded voice I didn't recognize. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours in a row since. My eyes felt like somebody had ground sand into them. And my hands had that low, constant tremor you get when you've been running on truck stop coffee and adrenaline for too many days. The kind of shake you have to brace hard against the wheel to keep anybody from seeing. We had 11 vehicles strung out in our convoy, 31 soldiers, 9 civilians we'd picked up along the road like driftwood pulled out of a flood, and orders to reach Arrowhead because somebody well above my pay grade had decided that 60,000 empty seats and a deep concrete bowl made for a good evacuation hub. The roads were supposed to be cleared. That was right there. In the brief, in plain black type, on a sheet I'd read 4 separate times looking for the catch, the roads are cleared. They were not cleared. And the thing in my side mirror was already up on its feet now, swaying, turning to follow us with that broken arm hanging slack at its side. Before I take you all the way into that stadium, into what we found waiting inside it and what it very nearly cost every one of us, I want to say something quick. Thank you to everyone who keeps coming back for these stories night after night. And if you're new here, then welcome. Pull up a seat and stay a while. If grounded survival stories like this one are your kind of thing, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment so I know you're riding along in the dark with me. It genuinely helps the channel keep going. Now let me get back to that highway, because that single thump under the lead Humvee was only the very beginning of the worst night of my life. Dunn's voice came over the handset a second later, and it was calm in the particular way men get calm when they have privately decided that panic is a luxury they cannot afford to spend. I'd learned to read that voice of his over 6 hard days. There was steel laid down under it, and there was real fear running under the steel, and he kept both of them pinned flat where they couldn't get up and get loose and start telling the rest of us what to do. Hold formation. Do not stop. Do not engage. We pushed to the gate. I keyed the mic, and I made my own voice match his, flat and level. Because that's the thing you do in a moment like that. You borrow calm off each other when you don't have nearly enough of your own to go around. Copy. Holding. But the highway had its own ideas about what we were going to do that night. We were on I-70 eastbound, on the long, lazy stretch that curves down toward the Truman Sports Complex, where the football stadium and the ballpark sit side by side in their wide oceans of parking. What had been a 6-lane artery on a normal Tuesday afternoon was now nothing but a frozen parking lot of dead and abandoned vehicles. Sedans nosed into the median. Minivans slewed sideways across 2 lanes. A jackknifed box truck folded against the concrete barrier. A school bus sitting empty and silent, off on the shoulder, with its red warning lights still patiently flashing into the nothing. Doors hung open everywhere I looked, dark rectangles gaping in the headlights. Some of the cars were still idling after God knows how long, their hazard lights blinking in slow orange pulses that swept across all that wreckage, like the heartbeat of something enormous and dying. People had run. You could read the whole story of it in the way the cars were positioned, not parked, not pulled neatly to the shoulder, just stopped mid-flight, slewed at panic angles across the lanes, noses jammed into guardrails, bumpers locked against bumpers where drivers had tried to force their way through gaps that were never wide enough. Nobody had spared a single thought for the next driver behind them. They had all been thinking the exact same thing at the exact same moment. And that thing was their own 2 feet. And how fast those feet could carry them away from whatever they'd just seen. We had planned for this, at least. I'll give the brief that much credit. The convoy ran in a wedge with a designated push vehicle out front. And the man driving it was a young soldier named Petrillo, who'd grown up running a snowplow on county roads back in Wisconsin. And that kid had the gentlest heavy touch I have ever seen behind a wheel in my life. He didn't ram the abandoned cars. He nudged them. He'd come up on a stalled minivan at a slow crawl, set the steel brush guard of the Humvee against the rear quarter panel, and ease the dead vehicle out of the lane with steady, patient pressure, walking it aside the way you'd move a sleeping dog off a porch step with your boot. Because he understood what I understood, that ramming bends frames and pops tires and shears bumpers off to tangle in your undercarriage, and a convoy that loses its push vehicle in the middle of a kill zone is a convoy that just stops and dies right there. So we crawled, 8 miles an hour, sometimes less, threading a needle made entirely out of dead traffic, the whole column of 11 vehicles strung out single file behind that one careful kid and his snowplow hands. And the dead were coming out of the cars. That's the part the briefings never prepared anybody for. The part every movie I'd ever seen got dead wrong. The infected didn't hoard up out in the open like some film extra's idea of what a monster does. Not at first. They had been people, ordinary people on an ordinary evening commute home. And almost all of them had been inside their own vehicles, belted in, when whatever this thing was finally tipped them over the edge from sick into whatever they became. So they were tangled in their seatbelts, slumped forward over their steering wheels, locked in back seats behind the child safety latches, which is a single detail that I have not once managed to stop thinking about since. As we crawled past, the deep diesel rumble of our engines and the sweep of our headlights and the simple animal fact of our movement woke them up, one after another, like we were dragging a long current of attention down the highway behind the convoy. A woman in a flowered church dress slammed both palms flat against the inside of a Camry's windshield, her mouth working soundlessly, leaving a long gray smear behind as her cheek dragged down the cracked safety glass. A teenager in a basketball jersey spilled out of the open tailgate of a pickup and hit the pavement face first and started low-crawling toward us across the asphalt, with no apparent awareness at all that his legs had quit working somewhere in the fall. His fingers scrabbled and tore at the road. He didn't slow down. He didn't seem to feel a single thing about any of it. "Eyes front," Dunn said over the radio. And I could hear plain as day that he was saying it to himself as much as to any of the rest of us. "Don't look at them. Watch your lane. Watch your spacing on the truck ahead." Easier said than done when one of them is reaching for your mirror. I had a civilian beside me in the cab of the second truck, a woman named Teresa Vega, maybe 60, with steel gray hair pulled back tight off a face cut deep with the lines of somebody who'd worked outdoors most of her life. She'd flagged us down a couple hours back, outside Oak Grove, standing dead in the middle of the road with both arms thrown up over her head, and her grandson tucked in close behind her, and a black garbage bag clutched against her chest like it was the only thing left in the world that mattered. The bag, it turned out, was full of insulin vials and melting ice packs. The boy was named Marcus. He was 9 years old, and right then he was asleep against her shoulder, or else doing that thing kids do where they squeeze their eyes shut tight so the world stays small and quiet and far away on the other side of their eyelids. Teresa kept her hand flat on his chest for the whole drive, feeling him breathe, her thumb moving in one small, slow circle around and around. She had not said 10 words since we picked the two of them up, but she was steadier than half the soldiers in that convoy, and in my experience, steady is worth more than talk by a wide margin when the whole world is coming apart at the seams around you. "How far?" she asked me now, low, not lifting her eyes off the boy. "1.5 miles," I said. "We'll pick up the parking gates here soon. The stadium lights are right there ahead of us. See them? And then we're safe." I didn't answer her. I'd learned a long time ago, dragging twisted cars out of the dark on the worst nights of strangers' lives, never to make a man a promise I couldn't personally keep. And right then, I could not keep that one for her. But there was more underneath my silence than just caution, and that more had a face attached to it and a voice. Back at the staging area, before we'd ever rolled out, a soldier I half knew had been part of the advance element that went into Arrowhead 2 days ahead of us. He'd come back, and when he came back, he was gray in the face. Gray like cold ash, like the color had drained out through the soles of his boots. And he wouldn't sit still. He kept getting up and moving and checking the door of the room behind him. I'd asked him what it was like in there, expecting him to say crowded or grim or scared, whatever it is soldiers usually say. Instead, he'd just looked at me with these flat, hollow, exhausted eyes and said 4 words, and then he stopped. "Don't trust the lights." That was all. Then he'd climbed up onto a different truck. One headed the other direction entirely, west, away from the city, away from where we were going. And I never laid eyes on the man again. And I never got the chance to ask him what in God's name he meant by it. The stadium lights were on. All of them. The full bank of stanchions all the way around the rim of Arrowhead, blazing hard white up into the low overcast, lighting the underside of the clouds the way they would on a Sunday afternoon in October, with the whole nation watching the game. And that should have been the single most reassuring sight in 100 miles of dark. Light means power. Power means working generators, means functioning infrastructure, means somebody inside that bowl had their act together enough to keep the systems running and the doors locked and the lights on. But the entire city around the stadium was black, dead black. Independence was dark behind us, swallowed whole. Kansas City was dark ahead of us. Every house and tower and streetlight and gas station sign for miles in every direction had gone out as the grid collapsed in long rolling failures over the last 3 days. We'd watched whole subdivisions go dark from the highway, just like that, like somebody pulling a sheet up over a face. Only the stadium burned. One single island of full white daylight floating in a dead black sea. And the longer I stared at it, the less it comforted me, and the more it bothered me. Down in that old part of my brain that had spent 20 years learning when a scene was wrong before I could even put words to the why of it. Power that's selective was not an accident. Somebody was burning fuel, real fuel, a great deal of it, hour after hour, to keep that whole bowl lit. And fuel was now the single rarest and most precious thing left anywhere in the world. You do not burn your last resource lighting up an empty stadium. Not for nothing. Not unless the lighting of it is the entire point. Don't trust the lights, I heard again, in that gray man's flat, dead voice, somewhere back behind my eyes. We came around the long, sweeping curve of the off-ramp, and the parking complex opened up below us. Acre after black acre of empty asphalt, laid out under those towering banks of light poles. And the gates were the very first thing that was actively, concretely, obviously wrong. They were open, not breached, not torn down or smashed through by something desperate trying to get in or out. Open, deliberately. The long mechanical arm barriers raised straight up to the sky like a salute, like the whole place was holding its doors wide to welcome us inside. And just past the main gate, parked neat and square inside the marked spaces, sat 3 civilian transit buses and 1 fuel tanker, a big one. A real over-the-road tanker, the kind you'd use to run a generator for weeks, maybe for months. All of it lined up, all of it squared away, all of it waiting. "Lead element, you seeing the buses?" Dunn asked, and I could hear him leaning forward in his seat to get a better look at them. Petrillo's voice came back, and the careful manufactured calm in it had a hairline crack running right through the middle of it now. "Seeing him. No movement at all. Headlights are off. Everything's dark except the bowl. It's just real quiet, Sarge." "Anybody answering on comms from the hub?" Dunn switched over to the frequency they'd handed us at the brief, the one that was supposed to connect us straight through to whoever was running the site. Hub actual. This is Convoy 76. We are at your north gate, requesting marshalling instructions. Over." Static. A long flat hiss of empty dead air. He waited 5 seconds, then 10, his thumb still on the key. "Hub actual, Convoy 76, how copy? Over." Nothing came back but the static. And under the static, very faint, almost too faint to register at all, there was something I couldn't quite put a name to yet. A thin, steady, regular pulse buried down in the noise that I didn't pay attention to and that I should have paid every bit of attention to in the world. A working generator. A full fuel tanker. Every single light in the place blazing like game day. And not one human voice anywhere on the radio. I felt the back of my neck go cold. That one specific cold I knew from 1,000 tow calls over 20 years. The feeling you get rolling up slow on a wreck that's gone too quiet, where the cars are smashed all to hell, and the airbags have already deployed. And there's no movement and no sound and no moaning, and you know it down in your stomach before your hand is even on the door handle, that whatever you're about to find on the other side of that glass is not going to be a fender bender. You can feel a scene that's already over. The whole stadium felt like a scene that was already over, like the cleanup was just waiting on us to notice and get out of the way. "We need to make a call," Dunn said. And for the first time in 6 straight days, I heard the calm in his voice give way, just slightly, just enough to scare me. "Push in or pull back." Behind us, the highway was sealing itself shut. In my side mirror, I watched a loose knot of figures spill out of the dark tree line along the frontage road and start out across the open parking lot toward our taillights, drawn by the engines, by the light, by the simple fact of us. 10 of them, then 20, then more behind those, coming up out of the dark in 1s and 2s, and then in a steady, patient trickle, all of them moving with that same tireless, terrible, unhurried gait, like they had nowhere else in the world to be, and all the time in the world to get there. Pulling back now meant turning 11 vehicles around in a debris field of dead cars and driving straight back into that crowd. Pushing in meant trusting a place that had its lights blazing and its mouth shut tight. A place a gray-faced man had warned me about, with the last 4 words he ever said to me. "We push in," Dunn decided, and the moment he decided it, the calm came reeling back into his voice like he'd hauled it in hand, over hand on a line. "Slow, weapons up, fingers straight and indexed off the triggers. I do not want a negligent discharge in this parking lot waking up the whole county. Holloway, you've got medical, and you've got eyes. You read a scene better than anybody I've got on this convoy. I want you out front with me when we dismount. Everybody else holds the vehicles. 2 soldiers minimum on every civilian truck, and nobody dismounts. Nobody, unless I personally call for them. Acknowledge." "Copy," I said, and reached down to make sure my aid bag was sitting where it should be, down in the footwell by my boots, by long habit, the way another man touches his wallet without thinking about it. The convoy rolled in through the open gate, all 11 vehicles threading slow between those 3 silent dark buses and the looming bulk of the fuel tanker. And in the very moment the last truck in our column cleared the raised barrier arm, I heard a sound that did not belong. A low mechanical groan, hydraulic, the sound of a heavy motor coming up under load somewhere out of sight. Then a single, heavy, metallic clank from somewhere behind us, solid and final. I twisted around hard in my seat to look out the back glass. The gate arm we had just rolled under was coming back down. Not falling, not broken loose and sagging on a snapped spring, lowering, smooth and slow and controlled, exactly the way it would if a hand somewhere in the dark had pressed a button. It came down level and settled into its cradle and locked there, sealing the road behind us. And out past it the crowd from the frontage road just kept coming on across the lot, slow and silent, toward a gate that had quietly shut itself in their faces and in ours, both at once. Somebody inside that stadium had just closed the door behind us. We brought the column to a halt in the wide loading apron near the northeast tunnel, the big vehicle ramp they use on game days to drive equipment carts and golf carts and the occasional ambulance down into the bowl. Up close, under the flat, hard white glare of those enormous lights, the stadium was even more wrong than it had looked from up on the highway. The lights were on, yes, but half of the public entry gates were chained shut from the inside heavy logging chains, the genuine article, run through the turnstile bars and locked off with brass padlocks. And the chains were new. Bright, clean steel, not a speck of rust on them. No weathering at all. Nothing like the kind of thing that had been hanging there since the last home game. Somebody had fortified this place recently, with real intent and real effort and real sweat. And standing there in that apron with my hand still resting on my truck door. I could not have told you whether they'd been working to keep something out or to keep something in. Both of those possibilities lived right there in those bright new chains, and neither one of them was anything I wanted to find. Dunn dismounted first, easing his door open with one hand and stepping down onto the concrete with his rifle held low and ready across his body. Then me, my boots coming down on the cold apron, and the night air hitting me full in the face. Diesel exhaust, an old rain on concrete, and underneath both of those, faint but absolutely unmistakable, the sweet, rotten smell I had come to know far too well over 6 days. The smell of the dead gathered in numbers. Then a 4-man element came out behind us, led by a corporal named Ash, a wiry, quiet man who'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan and who moved across open ground like he genuinely expected the dirt itself to be wired against him. Weight forward on the balls of his feet, eyes never once coming to rest on any one thing. We left the vehicles running, headlights flooding the apron with hard white cones. The civilians locked inside with their 2 soldiers apiece, their faces pale smears behind the glass. Teresa caught my forearm as I came around the front of the cab. "Mr. Holloway." Her voice was low and fast and absolutely level. The voice of a person delivering critical information before there's no time left in the world to deliver it. "If something happens to me, listen, Marcus's insulin is in the green bag, the one with the broken zipper pull. You'll know it by the feel. He gets 4 units before he eats, and never on an empty stomach, you hear me? And if he goes shaky and sweaty, and his eyes get glassy and he can't think straight, that's low blood sugar. That's the opposite problem. You give him juice or sugar then, not insulin. Never insulin. The opposite of what your gut tells you." "Nothing's going to happen to you," I said. And then, because I had just finished telling myself not to make a promise I couldn't keep, I corrected my own course right there. "But green bag, broken zipper pull, 4 units before food, never an empty stomach. Shaky and sweating means sugar, not insulin. I've got it. I've got him." She looked at me for one long second, and she knew exactly what I had just done, that I had refused her the easy lie and handed her the hard, true thing in its place instead. And her jaw tightened up, and she gave me one short nod. Steady? God in heaven, she was steady. The 5 of us crossed the apron and moved up on the nearest chained gate, and that was when we heard the first human voice that Stadium gave up to us. It came from somewhere back behind the turnstiles, out of the black mouth of the interior concourse where the weak emergency lighting didn't reach. And it was a man's voice, hoarse and slow and very, very careful, the voice of somebody who had learned the hard way recently to weigh every single word before he let it out of his mouth. "That's far enough. Don't come any closer to the gate. How many of you are there?" Dunn stopped, lifted one open hand to halt the element behind him, and answered in the flat official cadence of a man establishing a chain of command in territory that didn't have one anymore. 31 military, 9 civilians. We're a sanctioned evacuation element. Convoy 76, directed to this site by Regional Emergency Coordination out of the Metro EOC. Who am I speaking with? There was a long pause. Too long. When the voice came back, it had something in it that was tired and almost gentle. The way you gently correct a child who still believed in something you yourself had quietly stopped believing in some time ago. There's no regional coordination anymore. There hasn't been since yesterday afternoon. Whatever order sent you out here, whoever it was that signed it, the people who gave it, are gone now. A shape moved in the dark behind the turnstiles, resolving itself slowly as it came forward into the spill of our headlights. A big man, broad through the shoulders and gone soft and heavy through the middle. Civilian clothes. A pump shotgun held low and ready across his hips, with the easy, unthinking familiarity of a man who'd hunted his whole life, 50s. Gray stubble grown out over heavy jowls. A stadium staff windbreaker, navy blue, with a small embroidered arrowhead stitched over the breast, worn over a faded brown hunting vest. And the eyes, I knew those eyes too. They were the same eyes as the gray man's at the staging area. The eyes of a man who has not slept in days and has stopped expecting that he ever will again. Name's Carl Brandt. I ran facilities operations in this building for 19 years. I know every pipe and door and crawlspace and dead-end hallway in it. He looked past Dunn now, past every one of us, out at our long column of trucks with their engines idling and their headlights blazing. And something crossed his face that I did not like one bit. It was calculation. Cold, fast, hard arithmetic, running silently behind those exhausted eyes. When the call-up started, the military left us a holding element, maybe 20 soldiers. Then 2 nights ago, the holding element pulled out, in the middle of the night, quiet, took most of their trucks with them, and didn't say where they were headed or when they'd be back. Left about 40 of us behind. Stadium staff, some of our families, a handful of folks who'd come wandering in off the road, looking for a roof over their heads. He let his gaze travel slowly back across our headlights, our engines, all our noise. You brought a whole lot of light with you, soldier. A whole lot of engines. We didn't have a quiet option, Dunn said. The highway behind us is blocked solid, dead traffic for a full mile. We've got infected massing at your north gate right now, hundreds of them, building up by the minute, all drawn in behind us. We need to get inside, and we need to talk about what happens next. And I would very much appreciate it if you'd open this gate so we can do both of those things before that crowd out there figures out how to climb a chain-link fence. Brandt didn't move toward the lock. He stood there with the shotgun, and he studied us, slow. And when he finally spoke again, every word came out measured and counted, like he was paying for each one out of a thin wallet. I want you to understand me. 40 of us are alive in here right now, for one reason. Because we have been quiet, and we have been careful, and we have not given the dead one single solitary reason to think there's anything inside these walls worth coming for. You roll up to my wall, with 11 trucks and headlights, like a stadium parking lot on game day. And you draw every dead thing inside of 3 miles straight to my doorstep. So before I open anything, before I let your noise and your light in through my gate, I need to know that you're worth what you just cost the people in here. I need to know you're worth more than you took. He paused, and his eyes moved across the 5 of us, one face at a time, weighing each. They came to rest on me. You said you've got a medic with you. I am the medic, I said. His eyes held steady on me, and the cold, hard calculation in them shifted into something else. Something I liked even less than the calculation, because it was almost like hope. And hope on a face that's been hollowed out by days without sleep is a desperate and dangerous thing to find yourself standing in front of. Then you're the one I need to talk to. Forget the rest of it for 1 minute. We've got a problem in here, a real one, and it's coming due tonight. And I'm all the way out of people who can help me solve it. His voice didn't break, but it bent low, under a weight I could see he'd been carrying alone for far too long. We've got people in here who got bit. We've had them sealed up in the visitors' locker room because we couldn't find it in ourselves to do anything else with them. And a couple hours ago they stopped. They stopped being people. You can hear them in there if it gets quiet enough. And then there's a girl down in our infirmary who got scratched on a supply run yesterday afternoon. and she hasn't turned. She's been clean more than a full day now. And she's the kid's sister and the daughter and the best friend of half the people sleeping up on that concourse. And I need somebody who actually knows medicine to go look at her and tell me, straight, whether I have to do something about her before she does something to one of us. He swallowed, and his throat worked. Because I'm the last man standing in here who's supposed to make calls like that, and I have got nothing left in me to make it with. And there it was, the whole shape of the thing, laid bare in front of us in the dark. The reason the lights were on, the reason the radio was silent. This was no hub, and it never had been. It was a holdout that had run clean out of leaders, a frightened group of ordinary people huddled together in a concrete bowl in the dark, and we had just driven our entire convoy, our 9 civilians, an old woman and a sleeping diabetic boy, straight into the dead center of a decision that somebody had been too afraid and too decent to make alone. Dunn glanced sideways at me. The whole question was right there in his look. I gave him the smallest nod I could manage. "Open the gate, Mr. Brandt," Dunn said. "We'll help you with your sick, and we'll help you with the girl, and we'll figure the rest of this out together, all of us. But we do it organized, my way. Perimeter first. Because in about 10 minutes, that crowd at your north gate is going to reach this wall. And I would a whole lot rather meet them with a plan than with a prayer." For a long moment, Brent didn't move at all. Then he reached into his vest, came out with a single key on a length of dirty paracord, and the chains came rattling down off the turnstile bars, one heavy looping coil at a time, the noise of them loud and sudden in all that quiet. The gate swung inward on dry hinges. We went inside. The concourse of Arrowhead Stadium under emergency lighting is a strange and enormous and bottomlessly lonely space, and I don't believe I'll ever fully shake the feeling of walking into it for the first time. On a game day, those wide, curving corridors are packed shoulder to shoulder with 60,000 human beings. A slow-moving river of red and gold. The noise of it a physical pressure on your body. The air thick and warm with spilled beer and grilled meat and aftershave and 100,000 voices. Now it was lit by every third overhead fixture. Long stretches of pure shadow strung between weak yellow pools of light. The concession stands all rolled down and shuttered behind their steel security grates. The floor underfoot was a museum of a terrified crowd's final minutes on this earth. Dropped phones everywhere, their screens cracked and gone dark. Single shoes always just the one, never the matching pair. Which is a thing about disasters that I've noticed and never once been able to explain. A child's small red jacket trampled flat into the concrete. A family-sized bag of peanuts crushed to paste, sticking and crunching under our boots no matter how carefully we tried to step around it. A foam finger lying limp in a puddle of something dark that I made the choice not to look at too closely. And over all of it, that smell, the diesel and the wet concrete, and underneath both, always the sweet rot, faint out here. In the wide spaces, but stronger, I would learn, near the sealed places. The survivors had set up in the club level a long carpeted lounge with floor-to-ceiling windows looking straight down into the empty bowl of the stadium itself. And they came drifting out of the shadows to look at us as we climbed the stalled escalator on foot, our boots ringing on the dead metal steps. They looked at us the exact way refugees have looked at soldiers in every collapse there has ever been. Since the beginning of soldiers and the beginning of collapses, with relief and dread braided together so tight that you cannot pull the two of them apart. Because a uniform means help has finally arrived, and a uniform also means that things have gotten bad enough to need it. There were old people sitting in folding chairs with blankets over their knees. a man with one arm bound up in a makeshift sling of torn jersey fabric. Children, too many children, far too many pressed in against their parents' legs, watching us with enormous, still, silent eyes that didn't blink. A teenage girl in a stadium vendor polo shirt holding a baby that was very obviously not her own. They didn't cheer when they saw us. Nobody ever does in real life, no matter what the movies tell you. They just watched, and they held their breath, and they waited to find out whether we were the kind of help that saves you or the kind that gets you killed. 38 of them, Brant told me quietly as we walked, his voice pitched low so the watchers wouldn't hear. Down from 40. The two who'd been bitten on the afternoon supply run were in the visitors' locker room now, the ones we'd be able to hear when it got quiet enough. And Brant walked me down toward that room himself, with Dunn and Ash and two of Brant's own men trailing along behind us, while the rest of the convoy fanned out under Dunn's direction to begin setting up firing positions and casualty collection points all along the lower concourse. The visitors' locker room sat behind a heavy steel security door, the kind with a crash bar and an electronic card lock that hung dead and dark now without its power and its key cards. And the door was propped shut with a wooden equipment bench wedged in at an angle under the lever handle. And from the other side of that steel door came a sound that I'm going to hear in the quiet for whatever is left of my life, however long that turns out to be. It was not moaning. It was not screaming. It was a steady, rhythmic, patient thudding. The sound of bodies walking face first into a door, over and over and over, stepping back half a pace and walking into it again, never tiring, never adjusting their angle of approach, never once learning, just colliding with the obstacle and recovering and colliding again, like a wind-up toy that has marched itself into a baseboard and will keep right on marching against it until its spring runs all the way down or its legs snap off at the joints. Brant stopped 10 full feet short of that door and would come no closer to it. "That's Danny and Reyes in there," he said low. Danny ran our grounds crew. Good kid, 26, getting married in the spring, had the church booked. He stared at the door and his jaw muscles bunched and worked. Reyes was a cop, off duty when it started. Came in with his 2 boys. His boys are up in the lounge right now, asleep, I hope to God. He let out a long, slow breath through his nose. "I can't open it. I'll be straight with you. I cannot make myself open that door and see what's left of those 2. And I can't just leave it shut and walk away from it either, because that door right there is the only way into our generator room. The fuel feed and the transfer manifold are both in there, on the far side of that door, past those 2. And the tank that's running our generator right now is just about empty. We'll be down to fumes by tonight, maybe tomorrow morning if we're real lucky. When it runs dry, somebody has to go through that door to switch the supply line over to the tanker we've got parked outside." He turned and looked at me, and then at Dunn. And the desperation in his face was naked now, with nothing left to hold it back. "That's the real reason I let you in. I want to be straight with you about that too. I've got food, and I've got water in here for a couple weeks. I've got a defensible position, hard concrete walls, chained gates. But in about 12 hours, my lights go out. And the second they do, every dead thing pressed up against my walls out there in the dark is going to find its way in through the lower concourse, the way Danny and Reyes did. And I've got no way to switch that fuel and keep the power running without going through a room with 2 of them standing in it. So the lights weren't a comfort, and they weren't only a trap. They were a clock. The whole stadium was running on one single generator with a dying tank, and the only fuel left to feed it was outside the wall on a tanker that I realized with a fresh, cold drop in my stomach We had parked our entire convoy right alongside, like a row of idiots wandering into a room they couldn't see the shape of. And the only path to keep the power running led straight through a sealed concrete box full of the patient, marching dead. I understood now, finally, all the way down, why the gray-faced advanced soldier had come back the exact color of cold ash. He had stood right here and read this same arithmetic written on this same wall. And he had understood that there was no clean number waiting at the bottom of it for anybody. "How long to switch the line, if the room were clear?" Dunn asked. He was looking at the door the way he looked at every problem, like a thing to be broken down into pieces small enough to solve one at a time. 10 minutes, give or take, Brant said. "It's a manual transfer valve. A red wheel on the manifold. You close one line, open the other. Then you prime the transfer pump and watch the flow gauge come up. 2 of my people know how to do it cold. I'm one. The other's a kid named Soto. Works our IT department. But he's sharp. And I drilled him on it twice." He spread his big hands. 10 minutes of simple work behind a door we can't open. "Then we clear the room," Ash said. He said it flat, the way another man might suggest moving a fallen branch off a driveway. 2 contacts. Behind a door we already control. Confined space, no surprises. We stack on it, we breach. We put them down with aimed shots. We secure the room. Your man switches your fuel. I've cleared rooms with a whole lot worse odds than 2 against 5. He'd already shifted his stance toward the door, his weight settling, reading the breach in his head, the way men like Ash do without ever quite deciding to. I want to tell you that what came next was the first of 2 confrontations that would end up deciding everything that happened that whole night. And I've gone back over it in my head 1,000 times, since every choice, every word, every single round we did and didn't fire. If you've ever found yourself trapped in a building you couldn't get out of, with something on the far side of a door you knew you would eventually have to open, then I would honestly like to hear what you'd have done in our place. Put it down in the comments, because all this time later, I still couldn't swear to you that we got it right. We did not clear that room that night. Dunn made the call, and it was the right one, even though it ended up costing us more than I want to put into words. But he looked at our ammunition state first, and here's a truth that nobody likes about a real outbreak. A truth the movies and the games leave out entirely because it isn't exciting, it isn't cinematic. You are always counting rounds. In the back of your head, every minute of every hour, like a man with a failing bank account, checking the balance again and again and again, hoping the number changed since the last time he looked. And our number was not good. We'd rolled out of the staging area with a basic combat load, and we had burned through far more of it than I was comfortable with on the drive in. 2 separate contacts that got in close at a choke point near Blue Springs, where a stalled semi-truck had funneled the dead straight into our open flank. We had maybe 400 rounds of 5.56 across the entire element. A couple hundred rounds of pistol ammunition. Brant's people had 2 pump shotguns with a few boxes of buckshot, 1 bolt-action deer rifle, and nowhere near enough cartridges for any of it. In a stadium that might have to hold against a crowd that was still growing outside the walls, for days, every single round was a day of somebody's life. You do not spend that kind of capital clearing one room, when you could instead just seal it tighter and walk away. "We don't open that door tonight," Dunn said. "We reinforce it. We reinforce the wall along the lower concourse where they got in. And we find another way to switch that fuel that doesn't put 2 of my shooters into a sealed concrete box with biters at arm's length, where 1 bad second, 1 jammed weapon, 1 trip over a bench in the dark gets somebody bit and turns this from a bad night into a catastrophe. Brant, You said you know every crawl space in this building, so walk me through that generator room. There has to be another way to reach that valve. There was, sort of. And this is the point where Brant's 19 years quietly became the single most valuable asset in that entire building, worth more than every weapon we'd brought through the gate. He sat us down on a couple of empty equipment crates and sketched it out for us on the dusty floor with one thick finger. The generator room, he explained, had a maintenance crawl space running above its drop ceiling. An access chase that carried the building's mechanical and electrical lines through its guts. A man could get up into that chase from a service corridor outside the room, crawl on his belly along the top of the ductwork over the generator room, and reach an access hatch set into the ceiling that opened directly above the fuel transfer manifold. The two infected were locked down below, on the floor, with no way up. If we went in from above, dropped down through the hatch right onto the valve, made the switch, and climbed back up before they could close the distance, we could keep the lights on without ever once opening that steel door, without firing a single shot, without spending one precious round. It was a good plan. A careful, surgical, quiet plan. Exactly the kind that keeps people breathing in a world that has gone all the way wrong. And it rested on one single assumption that I did not examine nearly closely enough at the time, an assumption so obvious that it didn't even register to me as an assumption at all. It rested on the two infected staying inside that locked room. We spent the next 4 hours getting ready, while the dead arrived at the walls. They came exactly the way Brant had warned us they would. Drawn in by our engines, our headlights, the simple bright beacon of our arrival. They bled in from the dark in a slow, steady current. And by full dark, there were hundreds of them pressed up against the chained gates and the barricaded mouths of the lower concourse. A sluggish gray tide of bodies that never charged, never broke into a run, never stopped. That just leaned and pressed and reached blindly through the bars with their ruined hands. And the sound of them was the single worst thing about that whole night. Worse than the gunfire that came later. Worse even than the screaming, because it never stopped, not for 1 second. It was not loud. It was constant. A vast, soft, endless shuffling of feet on concrete, multiplied by hundreds, and laid over it a low, dry chorus of exhalations, that wet, rattling breath, hundreds of them at once, so that the longer you stood and listened, the more it stopped sounding like a crowd of bodies and started sounding like weather. Like wind moving through dead winter trees, like surf breaking somewhere you couldn't quite see. A constant low pressure laid against the whole skin of the building, and you began to feel it in your back teeth and behind your eyes whether you wanted to or not, until it was just the texture of the air. The survivors up in the club level went quiet and went small. The soldiers settled into their firing positions along the lower concourse, weapons resting across the barricaded gates, watching the gray hands work the bars. And I set up a casualty collection point in a far corner of the lounge, laid out what little medical gear I had across a folding table, took stock of my dwindling supplies, and then went to go find the girl. Her name was Hannah Soto, 17 years old, the younger sister of the same Soto kid who knew the fuel system. And she'd been scratched, not bitten, scratched during the afternoon supply run that had gotten Danny and Reyes killed. A graze from a fingernail, she told me, when one of the dead came up and over a chain-link fence at her faster than anything that broken-looking should have been able to move. She was sitting cross-legged on a cot in the makeshift infirmary they'd set up in an old first aid station. A thin girl with dark hair scraped back into a ponytail and a stadium hoodie 2 sizes too big on her, the sleeves swallowing her hands. She held her forearm out to me without my having to ask for it, turning it toward the weak light. The wound was 3 shallow parallel lines, already scabbed over and starting to dry, the redness around them faint and clearly fading. And that was the whole entire problem, right there on her arm. Because it had been more than 30 hours now, and she had not turned. She had not spiked the killing fever the bitten ran, within an hour or two of being bitten. Her eyes hadn't gone gray and filmed at the edges. She wasn't slurring her words, wasn't slow, wasn't anything at all except a scared, exhausted, completely human teenage girl looking up at me to find out whether I was going to tell her she was about to die. Which meant nobody in that whole building knew what to do with her. And the not knowing was its own slow poison, spreading quietly through the rooms above us, looking for somewhere to settle. Some of them want to put me out with the others, she said. She said it calm, looking down at the bandage on her arm and not up at me. The way people say the very worst things when they've already cried all the way through to the dry, flat center of themselves and come out the other side. I heard them talking last night, over by the windows. They think a scratch is the same thing as a bite, just slower coming on. They think I'm going to fall asleep one of these nights and turn and get up and bite one of the little kids before anyone can stop me. She finally lifted her eyes to mine. Are they right? You can tell me the truth. I'd a whole lot rather just know. I'm a medic, not a virologist. And I told her that straight off, because she'd asked me for the truth and she'd plainly earned it. But I'd been treating the bitten and watching them turn for 6 straight days running. And the pattern was about as clear as anything got in those days. Deep bites turned fast, within hours, every single time, because the infection went straight down into the bloodstream through saliva and torn tissue, a direct injection of the thing. Scratches were the gray zone, the uncertain country. Some of them carried enough of whatever it was to take you, and some plainly did not. And the ones that did seemed to take a great deal longer to do it, if they ever did it at all. 30-some hours clean, with a shallow graze that was already scabbing over and drying that put her on the lucky side of a coin flip that no one alive on this earth could see the landed face of yet. I think you're probably going to be just fine, I told her. I think if that scratch was going to take you, it would have taken you many hours ago, the way it took the 2 men you saw get bitten that same afternoon. But I'm not going to stand here and lie to you and tell you I know that for an absolute fact, because nobody on this earth knows it for a fact. Not me, not a doctor, not anybody. What I can promise you, though, and I'll promise you this much for certain, I am not going to put a living person out a door on a guess. Not you, not anybody. And I will say those exact words to the face of any man or woman in this building who comes and asks me to. She studied me for a long, quiet moment, reading my face the way you read a stranger you're deciding whether to trust. And then she did something that put a hairline crack right through the middle of my chest. She thanked me, quietly, simply, like I'd just handed her something precious and rare. All I'd given her was the plain truth and one small promise. And the fact that those 2 ordinary things landed on her like a gift told me everything I needed to know about the last 6 days that girl had lived through, and about the kind of cold, quiet fear that had been building up in the rooms over our heads while we worked. I want to stop right here for just a second, because I find myself wondering where it is you're listening from, what city, what country, what corner of the dark this finds you in, and whether the place you call home would have gone out fast in something like this, all at once, the way our city did, or whether it'd have been the kind of place that dug in and held on a while. Tell me down in the comments. It helps, somehow, on a night watch, to be able to picture the people on the other end of all this. By around 2 in the morning, we were ready to switch the fuel. The Crawlspace team was Ash going in first, because he was the smallest and the steadiest and could move through a duck chase without sounding like a grown man falling down a flight of stairs. and behind him, the kid Soto, to actually work the valve. And behind Soto, me, because if anything at all went wrong up there, somebody with medical training needed to be within arm's reach to deal with it. Dunn ran security down on the floor below, his element stacked up outside the generator room's steel door in full kit, ready to breach and engage if the absolute worst happened and the dead reached us before we could get clear and up. And Brant stayed up in the lounge at a radio he'd rigged together, headphones clamped over his ears, monitoring the emergency frequency that the hub had gone silent on. Because, and this is the one detail that came roaring back to matter more than any other later, he had been hearing something on it. Not voices, a tone, a repeating 2-second tone on the emergency net. 2 seconds on, then 2 seconds off, steady as a resting heartbeat. He'd first noticed it, he said, right around the time the holding element pulled out 2 nights before, and it had not stopped since. All that time, patient and regular, under the static, never-breaking rhythm. Probably just a dead man's switch on some piece of gear they left running, Brant had said earlier, waving one hand at it, plainly not wanting one single more thing on the pile of things he had to worry about. Automated. Means nothing. Just a beacon somebody forgot to shut off. I didn't think it meant nothing. Something about it sat wrong with me, low down, in the same place the open gate had sat wrong. In the same place the blazing lights over a dead black city had sat wrong. But we had a generator to feed before the tank ran dry on us. So I filed the tone away in the back of my mind alongside all the other wrong things. And I climbed up into the crawlspace. The chase above the generator room was hot and tight and foul. The air up there was a thick standing soup of dust, old grease, and the dry ammonia stink of rodent droppings. And it pressed in close on every side of you, the ductwork barely wider than a grown man's shoulders, the galvanized steel ticking and groaning and flexing under our weight in a way that made the small hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. We moved on our elbows and the points of our boots, slow, our headlamps switched over to red to save what was left of our night vision. The dim beams catching nothing at all, but dust motes hanging dead still in the airless dark. And the next 3 feet of dirty galvanized duct ahead of us. And below us, muffled through the drop ceiling, the rhythmic thudding of the 2 infected against the locker room door had stopped. I noticed it. Ash noticed it too. I saw his red-lit head come up, just slightly, a half-inch of pause in his crawl. Neither one of us said a single word about it, because we were both of us thinking the exact same thought at the exact same moment. And it was not a thought you wanted to say out loud, in a duct in the dark, over a room full of the dead. A thing that has stopped walking into a door has either lost all interest in the door, or it has found something new to walk into. Ash reached the access hatch set above the valve assembly. He worked the points of his fingers in under its edge and eased it up a bare crack, painfully slow, and put one eye to the gap, his rifle held awkward but ready in the cramped space. A long, long moment. Then his hand came back and made the flat, sweeping motion that meant clear. He lifted the hatch the rest of the way, lowered himself through feet first into the room below, dropped the last couple of feet to the concrete, and came up onto one knee with his weapon up, covering the dark. Then Soto went, scared but moving exactly the way he'd been drilled to move. Then me, last, lowering myself down through the hatch and into the generator room. It was loud down there, the steady mechanical hammer of the diesel generator filling the whole concrete box wall to wall. The air hot and thick with exhaust that the failing ventilation could no longer keep up with, stinging the eyes. The transfer manifold was right where Brant had sketched it. Mounted on the far wall, a red wheel valve on a steel cluster of pipes. 2 supply lines running off it, one from the nearly empty internal tank and one fed from the tanker parked outside the wall. Soto went straight to it, his hands shaking but sure, and got to work. He had good hands, the steady competence of a kid who'd fixed 100 frozen routers at 3 in the morning while a frantic manager breathed down his neck. And Brandt had drilled him right. He spun the red wheel to close off the dying line, opened the fresh feed, and bent down to the small electric transfer pump to prime it and watch the gauge. 30 seconds. A minute. The hammering note of the generator never so much as wavered or stumbled. The fresh fuel was flowing. It was working. We were going to keep the lights on, and we were going to do it without firing a single round. And then I looked across the room, past the bulk of the generator, at the door to the locker room. It was open, not breached from our side. Open from the other side, swung inward into the black mouth of the visitors' locker room beyond. And the wooden equipment bench that had been wedged under its handle lay knocked aside and tipped over on the concrete floor, which meant the 2 infected had not lost interest in that door after all. They had gotten through it, pushed it, leaned on it, worked the lever handle with clumsy dead hands, however in God's name it had happened. The patient, endless pressure of 2 bodies that never tired and never quit finally overcoming a propped wooden bench sometime in the last few hours while we crawled and prepared and waited. They were not in this room because they had already left this room. Out. Into the rest of the stadium. Into the dark concourses and the black stairwells. Up. Toward a club level where close to 40 exhausted human beings lay sleeping on the floor in the dark. Ash, I said, low and even, fighting with everything I had to keep it level. The door. He saw at the same instant the words left my mouth, his red-lit face going utterly, perfectly still. Soto, head down over the priming pump, watching his gauge, hadn't understood yet, hadn't even glanced up. And in that one frozen second, over the diesel hammer of the generator, faint and far away, and coming from somewhere up above us, toward the club level where the survivors slept. We heard it. A scream. A woman's scream. High and sudden and full of pure animal terror. Cut short. The thing about a confrontation in the dark is that it is never, ever, the fight you spent 4 careful hours planning for. We had planned for 2 infected behind a door we controlled. Instead, we had 2 infected loose somewhere inside an enormous unlit building full of sleeping people. And we were down in the basement at the wrong end of all of it. And up above us in the dark, somebody had just started to scream, and then stopped. Soto, finish that valve. Do not stop. Do not follow us. You hold this room. Ash snapped, already up off his knee and moving for the hatch, leaping to catch its lip. Holloway with me. Brandt. He keyed his radio as he hauled himself up bodily into the chase. Brandt, the locker room's empty. The contacts are loose in the building. We just heard a scream up your direction. Get everybody up. Get the kids behind a hard door, right now. Move! Brandt's voice came back ragged, snarled with disbelief and rising fear. Say again, Luce. They were behind a steel security. They're loose, Carl. They are in the building. Move your people now. We went back up through the hatch and back through the crawlspace faster than was remotely safe. Faster than I'd have allowed any man to move in broad daylight. Dragging ourselves through that hot, tight, stinking duct by main strength and bruised elbows. And somewhere in there, I tore the sleeve of my jacket and skinned my forearm raw against a sharp duct bracket, and never once registered the pain of it through the flood of adrenaline. We dropped down hard into the service corridor and ran for the stairs. And over the radio I could already hear Dunn's element moving. His voice cutting across the net in short-clipped fragments, coordinating, redirecting shooters up from the lower concourse to the club level. The whole careful, quiet, surgical plan we had spent 4 hours building had simply evaporated, gone, vanished into the dark. And in its place stood the oldest and the simplest problem there has ever been on this earth. Something was hunting in the dark, and the people I was responsible for were between me and it. The club level, when we finally came pounding up the stairs into it, was chaos held just barely in check by raw instinct and dumb luck. But Brant's people had done the right things in those first terrible seconds. The things that come from being parents long before they were ever anything else. The mothers and fathers had grabbed up the children and packed them into a corner suite with a solid door. And a knot of men holding the 2 shotguns and the bolt-action deer rifle had formed up into a loose line between that suite and the dark mouth of the lounge. Their bodies put between the threat and the kids. No hesitation, no discussion. One of the infected was already down. It lay as a wet ruin on the pale carpet. The skull caved clean in on one side, and beside it, a man sat slumped back against the wall with a fire axe lying across his knees, shaking violently from head to foot, staring at what he had just had to do to a thing that had been Danny from the grounds crew, who'd had a church booked for the spring. Nobody had taken the axe from him. Nobody in that room had the heart to. The woman who had screamed was named Pell. One of the concession stand staff, 50s, with a kind, round face. She was alive, but she was bitten deep, on the meat of the shoulder where it runs up into the neck, the very worst place a person can be bitten. The fabric of her shirt soaked black and clinging, and her face already going slack and waxy with shock. She knew exactly what it meant. She was crying, very quietly now. The fight gone out of it, holding her own shoulder with both hands, as if she could press the wound shut and press the whole future back out of it through her fingers. And her husband was down on his knees beside her, with his arms wrapped around her. And not one single soul in that room had yet found the words for what every last one of us already knew in our bones. The second infected Reyes, the off-duty cop, the father of 2 boys sleeping somewhere in this building, was not accounted for. "Where's the other one?" Dunn said, coming up hard behind us with 2 more shooters, sweeping the dark lounge with his muzzle and his eyes both at once. "Brant, I need a count. Everyone. By name. Right now. Move it." They counted. It took 2 minutes that felt like the better part of an hour. Parents calling their children's names into the corner suite and listening for the small answering voices, the staff sounding off down a list Brant knew by heart. And the math came out wrong in 2 different directions at once. 37 living and accounted for. 1 bitten Pell, and 1 missing. Not Reyes. A survivor, an older man named Hutchins, who'd bedded down near the far end of the lounge close to the open seating bowl. He was simply gone. No body, no blood trail that anyone could find sweeping the carpet with a flashlight. Just an empty bedroll, the blanket thrown back, and his reading glasses folded neatly on the floor right beside it. The way a man sets them down before sleep, fully expecting to need them again in the morning. And the door at the far end of the lounge, the one that led out onto the open seating of the bowl itself. The vast, dark amphitheater of 60,000 empty seats, descending row on row into total blackness, that door stood open to the night. Reyes had gone out into the bowl. And Hutchins, we had to assume, had either gone out after him or been dragged out there into all that open dark. Dunn made a decision in that moment that I will defend to anyone who ever asks me about it, as long as I live. He did not send men out into a pitch-black stadium bowl, 60,000 seats, 100 blind aisles and ramps and vomitories to hunt one infected in the dark. That's exactly how you lose 3 living men in order to save nobody at all. We hold right here. We secure this level, we lock that bowl door, and we barricade it heavy, and we deal with whatever's out there at first light. When we can see what we're shooting at, and more to the point, what we're shooting toward. Nobody, and I mean nobody, goes into that bowl tonight. Then he turned to me, and his voice dropped low, just for the two of us. Holloway, the bitten woman, give me a timeline. I crossed the lounge to Pell and knelt down and made myself look at the wound, peeling the soaked collar back from it with 2 careful fingers. It was deep, and it was ragged, and she was already running a fever I could feel radiating off her skin from a foot away, her teeth starting to chatter even in the close, warm air of the packed room. Hours, I said quietly, just for him. 3, maybe 4. Then she turns. The room went silent, except for Pell's quiet crying and her husband's low, broken voice murmuring something into her hair. The same few words, over and over and over. Everyone there understood it. In 3 or 4 hours, we were going to have to do to this kind-faced woman the exact thing the shaking man by the wall had just had to do to Danny. And we were going to have to do it with her husband right there. And her body wouldn't even be cold, because she wouldn't even be dead. She'd be warm and weeping, and holding her own shoulder a foot away from us. This is the part of an outbreak that no briefing and no movie ever once tells you the truth about. It is not, for the most part, fighting. It is this. It is sitting in a quiet, lit room with people you cannot save, watching a clock that only runs one direction, and deciding among yourselves who is going to have to do the thing that not one person on God's green earth wants to do. So I sat with Pell and her husband, because that is the job. That has always been the job. I gave her what little I had left to give her, which wasn't much, something to take the worst sharp edge off the climbing fever and the rising terror, to make the last few hours of her life bearable. And while I sat there holding her hand and counting her pulse climbing under my fingers, Brant came and crouched down low beside me, and he had the radio in his hands, the one he'd been monitoring all night. And the expression on his face was the expression of a man who has just finally, fully understood a thing that he had been working very, very hard not to understand for 2 solid days. The tone, he said, very low, pitched so the others packed close around us wouldn't hear it. On the emergency frequency, it changed. Changed how? It was steady. 2 on, 2 off, all this time, ever since the soldiers pulled out. He swallowed hard. About an hour ago, right around when your boy was down there switching the fuel for us, it went different. Faster. The gaps between got shorter and shorter, and there's a voice under it now, synthetic. An automated message, looping, down under the tone. He held out one earphone to me, his hand not quite steady. Listen to it. Tell me I'm hearing it wrong. I took the earphone and pressed it to my ear. And under a fast-pulsing electronic tone, I heard a flat computerized voice. The bland synthetic female voice that reads, "You the gate changes in an airport terminal repeating one single message on an endless unbroken loop. Sanitation protocol active. All marked sites scheduled for thermobaric sterilization. Evacuate marked sites immediately. Sanitation protocol active. All marked sites scheduled for..." I lowered the earphone slowly away from my head. Brant was watching my face, reading it, waiting on me. "What's a marked site?" I said. But the truth is, I already had a sick, cold, certain idea of what it was. Because all at once, a full dozen wrong things were lining up neat in my head and pointing the very same direction. The open gate that welcomed us in. The gate that lowered itself shut behind us on a hydraulic motor. The full bank of lights blazing up into the sky over a dead black city, visible from 30 miles in any direction. The fuel tanker parked and waiting, ready, topped off. The beacon transmitting on the emergency net for 2 days straight. All of it laid out so neat and so ready, like a place that had been carefully, deliberately, patiently prepared for something to arrive. Brent stood up. He walked over to the long window and put his flat palm against the cold glass and looked down into the black pit of the bowl. And then he tilted his head back and looked out at the rim of the stadium, where those huge banks of lights blazed hard white against the low clouds. The only light anywhere in a landscape otherwise drowned dead in dark. A beacon you could not possibly miss from a road, from a hilltop, from the air. When the holding element pulled out, he said slowly, every word of it landing like a dropped stone, "They didn't take the generator. They didn't take the tanker. They left the lights on, all of them, every bank around the rim. They left a beacon transmitting on the emergency net. And they told us they'd be back for us." He turned around to face the room, and his face in the window light was the exact color of the ash I'd seen on the advanced soldier days ago, the very same gray. They marked this site. They didn't leave us a refuge to wait in. They left us a target. And they kept it lit up bright so that whatever's coming could find it in the dark from a long, long way off. It landed on the whole room at once, on everyone close enough to have heard it, all of us running the same arithmetic at the same instant and arriving at the same number at the same time. The military had been overwhelmed. We had all watched it happening from the highway, watched the grid fall, and the order break down city by city. And somewhere up the chain of command, somebody had made a decision about sites exactly like this one. Sites where the lost and the dying and the bitten had concentrated, where the dead had massed together in killable numbers. And the decision was to burn them down to the foundations. And the surest, most efficient way in the world to gather every infected for miles around into one tight, contained, burnable place was to light it up like a stadium on game day, run a beacon screaming rescue across the emergency net, and let them come. And come they had. We had watched them come ourselves, hundreds of them, flowing in across the parking lot, drawn straight in by exactly the light and the noise that the entire plan was built around exploiting. The stadium was not a hub. It had never been a holdout, not really, not in the way these people thought. It was bait. And we had driven our convoy and our 9 civilians, an old woman and a sleeping diabetic boy, straight into the dead center of the trap, parked ourselves right alongside the very fuel that was going to feed the fire, and then sat back and watched the gate lower itself shut behind us. "How long?" Dunn said. He had come up silent behind us and heard the last of it. "Does the message give a time?" I pressed the earphone back to my ear and listened all the way through the loop twice more, hunting for it. "No countdown in the message itself," I said. But the tone escalated about an hour ago, got faster. In my experience, things that count down get faster as they get close to the end. I'd guess we're already inside a window, and I'd guess the window was hours, not days. So now we had a second clock, and it had nothing in common with the first one. And it did not care in the slightest about the dead massing at the walls, or the bitten woman dying under my hand, or the scratched girl who hadn't turned. Somewhere out there in the night, an aircraft was inbound to a marked site. And the marked site was the cold concrete floor that all of us were standing on. The whole situation had inverted itself entirely in the space of one looping message. An hour ago, our problem had been keeping the lights on. Now the lights were the thing trying to kill us. The fuel we had crawled through a duct in the dark to switch, that fuel was now feeding the beacon that was calling down our own destruction out of the sky. Every careful, clever, quiet thing we had done that night to survive had in fact been us pulling the noose tighter and tighter around our own necks, one patient knot at a time. Dunn moved fast, and watching him move, I understood all over again exactly why he wore the rank that he wore. He did not waste one single second on disbelief or on anger or on the natural human search for somebody to blame. He took it, and he turned it over once, and he laid it back down flat and clean. Then we've got two enemies, and one of them's got a timer, and we cannot fight a timer. We can't shoot down an airstrike. So we don't even try. We don't fight it. We leave. We get every living person in this building out of it, and we get them far enough away that when it comes down, we're not standing in it. He turned to Brant. How many can your buses carry? 3 transit buses, plus the tanker cab. Brant was already there with him, already running the numbers, mind to mind. Pack 'em tight, leave the luggage, maybe 100 souls all told. We've got 37, plus your 40, that's 77. We fit with room to spare, but... And his face fell as the obstacle rose up in front of him, plain as the wall behind him. The north gate's down and chained, and the whole north apron is wall-to-wall dead now, hundreds deep, all the ones we drew in with your trucks. We cannot drive out the way you came in. They'd swarm the bus doors before we made 10 yards. Is there another way out of this complex? And here Brant's 19 years paid out for the third and final time, the most important time of all. South. There's a service road out the back of the complex, runs toward the old racetrack and the interstate frontage road. It's the route the equipment rigs and the catering trucks use. The gate down there's a manual roll gate, not powered. 2 men can shoulder it open in half a minute, but... He stopped, and a second obstacle showed itself behind the first one in his tired eyes. The south tunnel ramp. The way we'd have to bring the buses up from the lower level to reach that road. It's been blocked since before you ever got here. When the dead first got down into the lower concourse, days back, we dropped a whole load of stadium seating sections and bleacher units and equipment carts across the ramp's narrow point to wall ourselves off from down there. It's a snarl 12 feet deep. It'd take an hour to clear it by hand, maybe more. And we do not have an hour with that timer running in the sky, and we sure as hell don't have it with hundreds of them at the walls. Then we make a hole faster than by hand, Dunn said. Holloway, you drove a tow truck for 20 years. You know how to move heavy weight off a road in the dark. I know how to drag it, I said. And my mind was already there, already down on that ramp working the problem. And I was grateful, genuinely grateful, for the first time all night, to have in front of me a problem I actually knew how to solve. Not lift it. You can't lift it, and you don't need to. If that blockage is loose seating sections and bleacher units, that's awkward weight, not dead weight. It'll snag and catch and tangle, but a vehicle with a winch and a chain can yank a path straight through the middle of it, a whole lot faster than 40 pairs of hands picking at it piece by piece. Your Humvees have winches on the front bumpers? 2 of them do, Ash said. Then we rig both of them. Anchor the cables to the guts of that blockage, not the front of it. The guts drag it apart from the inside out, and you've got a lane wide enough for a bus in 15 minutes instead of an hour. Dunn gave one short, hard nod. Do it. Take Ash, take the kid Soto. He knows the lower level. Take whoever else you need to get it done. Brant, get your people moving toward the south tunnel staging area now. Kids first, the little ones carried, quiet and fast and in good order. We have got a bitten woman who's turning, a missing man, an infected loose in that bowl, and an airstrike inbound out of the sky. And we are going to get out from under all 4 of those things at the very same time. And the only way on God's earth that happens is that everybody starts moving this minute. Go. And then Pell's husband stood up. He came up off his knees slowly, his joints stiff, and his voice cracked clean across that lit room like a dropped plate shattering on tile. And the fifth problem, the one we had all been so carefully not looking at. The human one became one we could no longer step around. "You're not leaving her," he said. His face was wet and his hands were shaking, but his voice, after that first crack, came out hard and flat and certain. "You're not loading everybody up onto those buses and driving off into the dark and leaving my wife behind to turn alone in a building you're going to stand back and let them burn down. That is not happening. Not while I'm breathing." His red, swollen eyes moved across the room, and they found Hannah Soto where she stood at the edge of it, with her bandaged arm held tight against her stomach, and they hardened. "And you're not bringing a scratched girl onto a bus packed full of children either. If we're going to stand around and decide who's safe enough to take with us, then we decide it for everybody. The same rule, for everybody. No exceptions for the pretty ones." The room turned. I felt it turn, physically, the way a current pulls hard at your legs when you wade out too far into a river you thought you understood. Fear does this. It is always looking for somewhere to put itself, somewhere solid to land. And the very easiest place in the whole world to land your fear is on the people you can already see in front of you. The known risk over the unknown one. The bitten woman and the maybe-bitten girl, right there with faces and names you can point to, over the abstract silent horror falling down out of a sky you can't even see. Heads began to turn toward Hannah. She went white as paper and pressed her back flat against the wall. Her brother Soto stepped in front of her without a single word, without even seeming to decide to do it. His body just moving on its own. And now there were two camps forming in a room with a timer running in the sky over it, which is precisely, exactly, how good plans die and how good people get killed. This was the second confrontation of that night. It was not with the dead, and it was the one that very nearly killed every last one of us. I stood up from beside Pell. I'm not a leader. I'm a medic and a tow truck driver, and a tired old man with sand in his eyes. But I was the one who had examined Hannah's arm with my own two hands, and I was the one kneeling beside the dying woman. And that meant the room would hear me where it might not hear a soldier barking an order at a crowd of frightened civilians. I kept my voice flat and low and dead even, because the single worst thing you can do in a room running that hot is to match its temperature. You don't put out a fire by setting yourself alight. You bring it down by refusing, flatly, to climb up to meet it. Two things, I said. And then we move. Because that timer in the sky does not care about either one of these things. And every single second we stand here arguing about it is a second of everyone's life that we're burning up for nothing. I turned first to Pell's husband, and I gave him my eyes, full on, and I gave him the truth, because he'd earned it the same way the girl had earned it. Your wife is bitten, deep, in the worst place. She is going to turn, and I will not lie to you or to her about that. And I'm more sorry about it than I've got words to tell you. But she has not turned yet. Right now, this minute, she is a living woman who knows your voice, who knows your face. And we do not put living people down on a schedule that happens to be convenient for the rest of us. So here is what's going to happen. She rides on a bus, with me, restrained gently and as comfortable as I can possibly make her. And I stay right at her side the entire way out. And if she turns on that road before we're clear of all this, then I am the one who deals with it. Me, with my own two hands. And you don't have to. And nobody else in this room has to either. That's the deal. It is the best deal I've got in me. and it is a damn sight more than most men standing in my boots would ever offer you. Pell's husband's face crumpled inward on itself, but he didn't argue. He couldn't, because underneath all that fear and all that grief, he was a decent man. And a decent man can hear it, even through the noise. When somebody offers to carry the very heaviest part of a terrible thing so that he himself won't have to. Then I turned, slow, and let my eyes travel across the whole room, across the camp that was hardening around the easy, ugly answer. Hannah was scratched. Not bitten, scratched. A shallow graze from a fingernail. 33 hours ago, and she has not turned. The bitten turn in hours, you saw it tonight. With your own eyes. You saw Danny. You saw what's happening to Pell right now, right in front of you. Hannah has gone more than a full day and a third clean. If that scratch was going to take her, she would be at a door somewhere in this building right now, this minute, walking into it over and over and over, the way Danny and Reyes were doing 1 hour ago. She is not. She is a frightened 17-year-old girl who is more human right now than half of us in this room feel. I let that sit a beat in the quiet, watching it land. You're scared. I know you're scared. We all are. And you want to take all of that fear and turn it into something you can see and grab hold of and lock up behind a door, because that feels like doing something. It feels like control. And I understand that better than you could possibly think I do. But hear me clearly now. You put that girl off this bus, and you have not made yourselves one single bit safer. Not one. You've just murdered a child to feel like you were in control of something for 10 minutes. And then you'll carry the weight of it for whatever's left of your lives. And the thing that is actually, truly, right now coming to kill us all tonight, it is not on that girl's arm. It's in the air. So she rides, they both ride, and we go. Right now. Move your feet. I don't know to this day whether it was the words themselves, or whether it was only that I had given all that loose fear somewhere better to land. Onto the timer. Onto the dead at the walls, onto the silent thing falling out of the sky. The real enemies. The ones that actually deserved it. But the room broke the right way. Soto let out a long, shaking breath and dropped his shoulders an inch. Pell's husband sank back down beside his wife and gathered her in close and held on to her. And Brant, God bless that exhausted gray man, did the single smartest thing anybody could have done. In that moment, he turned it instantly into motion, before the moment had any chance to curdle and turn back the other way. Kids to the south tunnel now. Parents carry the little ones. 2 lines. Follow my staff. You all know who they are by now. 1 bag each, only what you can carry in 1 hand. Leave the rest where it sits. Move, people. Move. And 40-some people moved as they filed past me, fast and frightened and quiet, herding their children ahead of them. I caught Hannah's eye one more time across the room, and she mouthed 2 words at me. Thank you, for the 2nd time that night. And I felt the full crushing weight of what I had just done settle down onto my shoulders for good. Because here is the one thing I did not say out loud in that room. I believed she was clean. I'd have bet my own life on it without a flicker. But betting on a thing and being certain of a thing are 2 completely different animals. And I had just stood up in front of 40 terrified people and staked every last one of them on a coin flip whose landed face not one living soul on this earth could see. I had made them all share a bus with my bet. If I was wrong about her, I had killed them. I knew it, even as I said the words. And I said them anyway, because the only alternative was murdering a child on a guess. And I had decided a very long time ago, on 1,000 cold roadsides, exactly which kind of mistake I could live with carrying. There was no time at all to sit in the feeling of it. I grabbed Ash and Soto and 2 more soldiers, and we ran for the lower level to go and make our hole. The south tunnel ramp was a wide concrete vehicle ramp that spiraled down from the loading apron to the lower concourse, lit by the same weak, scattered emergency fixtures as everywhere else in the building. Every third one working and the rest of them dead. So that we ran down through alternating bands of dim yellow light and total black, our shadows leaping and stretching and vanishing ahead of us. And the blockage was exactly what Brant had described. Only worse to lay eyes on in person than it had been in my head, a wall of stadium seating sections. Whole bolted rows of them torn loose from the deck. Bleacher units, equipment carts, all of it dragged across the ramp's narrowest point in a blind panic days ago. And wedged and tangled together into one solid mass maybe 12 feet deep. And behind it, faintly, through the gaps in the snarl, I could see movement in the black of the lower concourse beyond. The slow, pale shifting of dead things shouldering up against the far side of it, drawn straight to the new sound of us arriving. The very blockage that had protected these people from the dead below, for days, was now the one and only thing standing between us and our only way out of the building, and the one and only thing standing between us and them. We worked fast, and we worked clean. We backed 2 Humvees nose first up to the blockage, paid out their winch cables off the front drums, and ran the cables in through the snarl by hand. Ash and 1 other man reaching deep, shoulder deep, into the tangle to hook the cable ends not to the outer pieces of it, but to the deepest, most wedged-up bleacher sections we could get our gloves around. Because in a snag like that, and I had cleared 100 of them over 20 years, jackknifed loads and rolled trailers and cars wadded up tight into guardrails on black ice you do not pull from the front. You pull from the gut. You find the one piece that everything else is bracing against, the keystone of the whole jam. And you drag that single piece out, and the entire structure collapses in toward you and comes apart in your hands. Tow truck logic, the most useful single thing I knew that whole night, after Brant's blueprints in his head. On my count, both winches together, slow and steady, and do not jerk the lines. I called out over the growing wet shuffle of the dead pressing in on the far side. If one of these cables snaps under load, it'll come whipping back through here and take a man's head clean off his shoulders, so nobody stands in line with a cable. Get to the sides, get behind something. Slow, 3, 2, 1. Both winches engaged at once with a low electric whine and took up the slack, the cables coming taut and singing a high thin note, and the whole 12-foot snarl shuddered and groaned in protest. And for one long second, nothing at all moved. And I thought for sure we'd hooked it wrong, and we'd have to go back in and start over with the clock running. Then, with a tortured screech of dragging steel and the crack of snapping molded plastic, the gut section finally gave way, and the entire blockage folded inward and toward us. Bleacher units tumbling down, whole rows of seats clattering and bouncing and skidding down the ramp. And a lane tore open straight through the middle of it, ragged on both edges, but wide enough for a bus to pass. 11 minutes. We'd done it in 11 minutes flat. And in the very same moment the lane tore open. The dead in the lower concourse on the far side felt the change in the air, the new gap, the new open path. And they began at once to come up and through it. Slow, steady, endless. 1 and 2 at a time, shuffling up out of the dark and into the open mouth of the lane toward us. Gaps open. Contacts inbound through it. Ash called into his radio, his voice gone flat and fast and professional. We need vehicles down here now, and we need a holding line on this lane right now, or they pour straight up into the staging area where the kids are. And this is where the limited gunfire of that whole night became the necessary gunfire, and where every single round we had hoarded and counted and refused all night long to spend finally earned its keep all at once. We could not let the dead flood up that ramp and into a staging area packed full of children. But we also could not stand and fight a horde out in the open, because a horde is not a thing you can ever defeat. It is only a thing you can feed, one body at a time, until your magazines run dry and they are on top of you and over you. So we did the one thing that actually works against numbers. The same thing armies have done at gates and mountain passes for 3,000 years. We made a choke point, and we held it just exactly long enough, and not one single second longer than that. The torn lane through the blockage was a funnel, barely a man wide, jagged broken steel and plastic on both sides of it. Ash and I and Petrillo the plow kid, who'd handed the wheel off to a relief driver and turned out to be a rock-steady hand on a rifle when it counted for everything set up at the top of the lane with one Humvee's headlights aimed straight down it, flooding the whole funnel with hard white light. And the dead came up into that light 1 and 2 at a time, because the lane physically would not allow more of them through at once. And we put them down with single-aimed shots, head height, no panic, no spray, no wasted rounds. Ash called the rhythm in a low, flat, steady voice, like a man reading numbers off a clipboard. 1 up, lane center down. 2 coming, your left down. Watch the right, watch your right down. Reload, you're dry. I've got the lane. Take your time. It was nothing at all like the movies. It was slow, and it was ugly, and it was mechanical, and it stank of cordite and worse. And the bodies dropped in the narrow lane, and the pile of them became part of the barricade itself, so that the next ones up had to climb over their own dead to reach us, which slowed them further still, which bought us seconds. And we held that line, because behind us and above us, 77 living human beings were loading themselves onto buses we could hear coughing and roaring and shuddering to life up the ramp. We held that lane for 9 minutes, and I counted every single round, because I will always count. It's wired all the way down into me now, and I expect it always will be, until the day I run out of them for good 61 rounds of rifle and 1 full magazine of pistol. 61 rounds for 9 minutes of life for 77 people. When the lead bus finally radioed loaded and ready, we collapsed the position the way you're trained to, the way that keeps you alive doing it. Leapfrogging back up the ramp, one shooter firing down the lane while the other 2 moved past him and set themselves. Then that man covering while the first one peeled back. Step by step by step, the dead following us up into the funnel and dying in it the whole way, until we reached the top of the ramp and threw ourselves bodily into the last waiting Humvee and hauled the heavy doors shut. And the pile of bodies choking the lane below us bought the few last seconds we needed to drop it in gear and pull clear. The convoy ran for the south gate. Not 11 vehicles anymore. We'd left behind the trucks. We no longer had the crews to drive. Consolidated everyone we could into the 3 transit buses, with Brandt himself white-knuckled behind the wheel of the fuel tanker. And 4 Humvees riding front and rear of the column, like sheepdogs working a flock. The manual roll gate at the South Service Road took 2 men a full 30 seconds of hard shouldering to drag open, the dry steel screaming on its rusted track the whole way. And then we were out of the marked sight, out from under the blazing white lights, onto the dark frontage road that ran away from the stadium, away from the bowl, toward the black ribbon of the distant interstate. And behind us, shrinking steadily in the rear glass, Arrowhead Stadium blazed up against the night sky, beautiful and terrible and obscene all at once, lit up bright like game day, still screaming its automated promise of rescue out into the empty emergency net, calling to anyone in the dark, desperate enough and tired enough to turn and drive toward it. I rode in the rearmost Humvee with Dunn. Watching the stadium recede behind us, Pell was 3 vehicles up. In the lead bus, restrained the way I had promised. Still herself, her husband holding tight to her hand. My burden and my promise, riding on ahead of me in the dark. Hannah Soto was on that same bus, alive, human, my bet still uncalled, still hanging in the air over all our heads. And we were maybe 2 miles out, the stadium dwindling to a glowing bowl of light in the rear view, when Dunn's radio crackled one final time with that flat, synthetic airport voice, the tone underneath it running from fast all the way up to one single, solid, unbroken tear of sound. And the sky over the stadium turned white. There was no sound at all at first. That's the one thing nobody ever tells you about distance and ordnance. The light comes first. A flat, silent, total, blinding white flash that printed the entire skyline on the inside of my eyes. Every light pole, every section of the rim, burned into my vision in stark negative. And then a full second later, the stadium's lights, all of them, the whole blazing bank around the rim, died at once, swallowed whole, gone to nothing black between one heartbeat and the next. And then finally, the sound and the pressure wave arrived together. A deep, concussive whump that I felt in my chest and in the steering column under my hands and in the fillings of my back teeth. And the whole rear of the convoy rocked hard up on its suspension. And a rolling bloom of orange fire climbed up into the black where the white lights had stood a heartbeat before. Arrowhead Stadium, the bowl, the beacon, the trap, the visitors' locker room, the generator we had crawled through a duct in the dark to feed, the hundreds and hundreds of dead pressed patiently against its walls, all of it, every last bit of it folded inward on itself and went up in fire. The shockwave shoved the trucks forward, and the windows held, and the buses held, and we just kept driving, because there was nothing else on this earth to do but drive. And for a long, long time, not one single soul on the radio said a word. We'd made it out by 2 miles, and by maybe 8 minutes. 8 minutes. If the blockage had taken an hour to clear by hand, the way Brant first feared it would, if the fuel switch had gone wrong and pinned us in that generator room with the door open, if the room upstairs had broken the wrong way over the scratched arm of a frightened girl, and we'd burned 20 minutes fighting each other instead of moving. Any one of those 3 things, just one of them, and we would have been a single line item on a list of a marked site, sterilized exactly as planned. And no one on this earth would ever have known there were 77 living human beings inside the target when it came down out of the sky. We drove until the fire was aglow on the horizon behind us, and then a faint smudge, and then nothing at all, just dark. Just the dark we belonged to now. We found a county road and put real hard distance between ourselves and every lit thing left in the world, because every single one of us had learned the same exact lesson at the same exact instant, watching that flash bloom in the rear view. And not one of us would ever forget it as long as we drew breath. In this new world, light was not safety. Light was a target. The dark was where the living belonged now, where the living survived, and we were going to live in it, all of us, from this night forward. Pell turned about an hour before dawn. I was with her, the way I'd promised her husband I would be, and he had finally fallen asleep slumped against the cold window glass from pure animal exhaustion, his hand still loosely holding hers in his lap. I felt the change come into her before I ever saw it, the warmth of her hand going wrong somehow, going slack and then going wrong, and the rhythm of her breathing sliding from a sick, wet rasp into that dry, even, terrible mechanical pull that I knew far too well by then. I kept my promise. I kept it quietly, and I kept it gently. And I did it before he woke, so that the husband opened his eyes to a thing already finished and done. So that the very last weight he would have to carry up out of that bus was his grief, and not the act itself. He did not thank me for it. There are some things one man should never thank another man for, and we both of us knew that was one of them. But he reached over, and he gripped my forearm once, hard enough to leave a bruise that stayed for a week, and he held my eyes for a long moment in the gray pre-dawn light coming up through the windows, and I understood everything that was in that grip. That's the other thing I carried up out of that stadium and into the rest of my life, that one hard grip on my arm. And I carry it still, every single day. Hana Soto never turned. Not that night, not the next day, not the day after that one. 3 days, then 5 days, then 2 weeks she stayed herself. The scratch on her forearm healing down to 3 faint pink lines, and then down to almost nothing at all. Just a memory you'd have to know to look for. And every single day she woke up still human was a day my bet paid out a little more. A day I let go a little more of a breath I hadn't fully known I'd been holding since that lounge. I think often about that room, about how close it came to breaking the other way, about how a frightened, decent, ordinary group of people very nearly did a truly monstrous thing, not because any of them were monsters, but because the real threat was silent and invisible and 20 miles straight up in the dark, and a scared girl with a bandaged arm was right there in front of them, where they could get their hands on her and feel, for 10 minutes, like they were in control of something. The dead didn't almost destroy us in that stadium. We almost destroyed ourselves, and the dead were just the weather we'd have done it in. We're still moving, what's left of the 77. Smaller now by the ones the road has taken in the weeks since, because the road takes its share. It always takes its share. Teresa and Marcus are still with me. The boy is down to his last few weeks of insulin now, and we're driving toward a rumor of a regional pharmacy depot that somebody heard about on a working radio, which is its own kind of clock. Ticking down quiet under everything, but at least it's the kind of clock I understand. The kind with a number you can fight. The kind I can put my hands on. We run dark now. Always. We keep our engines as quiet as we can keep them, and we run without lights on the open roads, navigating by moon and by memory and by feel. And we never, ever, under any circumstance, stop somewhere because it looks safe and bright and welcoming. Because I've seen now, with my own eyes, exactly what a welcoming light is for in this world. I have seen the gate that opens by itself and closes itself behind you on a hydraulic motor. I have heard the patient 2-second tone counting itself down under a synthetic voice that calls mass death by the name of sanitation. And sometimes at night on watch, with everyone else asleep in the trucks around me and the dark pressing in soft on every side, I'll tune the radio slow across the emergency band, low, with an earpiece in so I don't wake anybody. And every so often, far off, faint and thin under all the static, I'll catch it. That 2-second pulse. Steady, patient, waiting. Another marked sight. Somewhere out there in all that dark, lit up bright and burning fuel it cannot spare, transmitting its promise of rescue to anyone left alive and desperate enough and tired enough and frightened enough to turn the wheel and drive toward the light. I always turn it off. And then I always lie awake a while, in the dark. And I wonder how many convoys are out there, right now, this very night, exhausted and low on rounds and out of road and out of options. Watching a stadium or a hospital or a school glow on the black horizon like the last safe place left on the whole face of the earth. Easing slow toward an open gate, about to make the exact same drive that we made, toward the exact same waiting trap. If you'd been in that lounge with us, With a timer running down in the sky and a frightened room turning on a scratched girl, would you have done what I did and staked every one of them on a bet you couldn't see the bottom of? Or would the fear have won out? I'll be honest with you. All this time later, I still couldn't swear to you that I was right. I only know that we are alive, and that 70-some people drew breath in the dark because of choices made inside a building that doesn't exist anymore. A building that's nothing now but a black crater and a long scar of melted steel on a hill above a dead city. If a story like this one is your kind of thing, then stay with me, because I've got more of them in me, and the road doesn't get any shorter. Keep your lights off, keep your rounds counted, and whatever else you do, wherever this finds you tonight, don't trust the lights.